So welcome everybody to Drop the Mic Live 2020. Drop the mic. Please, if you are not following us on Twitter, please follow us on Drop the Mic 2020 on Twitter. And then you are joining us tonight on Facebook Live. Hopefully you will follow us here as well and tell 5 or 6 of your closest friends. I am here tonight, baby. I am just so excited, even in all of the heaviness that is going on in the world, in our nation. It gives me great hope to be joined by other freedom fighters. So I am here tonight with none other than Congressman Khanna from the great state of California. Congressman, how are you tonight?
I'm always better when I'm talking to you. You bring out an energy, an inspiration, a hopefulness. I miss our days on the campaign trail. I miss my Nina Turner dose where every month I'd get to see you give one of your orations and get everyone standing up and clapping and having their hands up.
Well, I miss that too, Congressman. Many a day we were on that same stage together where you break it down. You the teacher and I'm the preacher. Hello, somebody. Got that down. Then we were the combination, teacher and the preacher.
Your way of saying you're boring and I get the crowd going.
Oh, no, because you laid out the facts and I could take what you laid down and just put some more, just
put soul in it.
That soul too. It goes hand in hand. The teacher and the preacher. We're gonna take that out. We're gonna have, once we can get back out again like that, we have to take that on the road. The teacher and the preacher. No, it's always wonderful to join you. Miss you too, and it was wonderful that we were together last night. We know you got duty calls in the Congress, but
yeah,
Mayor Cruz and also
I have so much affection, love for Ben Cohen and Mayor Cruz, and I missed the call last night, but I'm going to be on. When we do it again, I mean, this group is not disbanding in any way. We're just
not at all. We're going to do this monthly, and just so everybody knows that, Congressman, just in case you don't know, because Congressman, there might be some new people watching tonight who may not know that we served as the national co-chairs for the Bernie 2020 campaign, and Congressman Khanna, myself, Mayor Yuleen Cruz of San Juan, Puerto Rico, and the Minister of Ice Cream himself. We were and still are the Fantastic Four. And we have committed to continuing to stay together because relationship is so vitally important. So I'm really excited about that. So Congressman, speaking of Ben Cohen, who's really been out there, he just came from protesting. He went to DC and he took it to the streets with the protesters. Just so proud of him. And one of the reasons why we are doing the reason why we're doing Drop the Mic 2020 is because of a vision that he had to really educate the masses about the Pentagon budget, which you know a little about. And the fact that 61% of the discretionary budget in this country goes towards that. I think 2019, the discretionary budget was about $1.19 trillion. 61% of that, or over $700 billion, went towards the Pentagon, and you and 28 of your colleagues actually were fighting and passed it wasn't a bill, but you introduced what do you call it? It wasn't a bill. You introduced it. There's a technical term for what you introduced, but you introduced a piece to say that money, some of that money, should go towards fighting COVID. Would you talk to us a little bit about that?
Well, Senator, it's the hardest fight in Congress of all the fights we take on, whether it's on racial justice, on economic justice, or social justice. The hardest fight is to take on the military-industrial complex, to take on funding for the Pentagon. We get almost no votes. It's usually Barbara Lee and myself is shouting into the wilderness. But the reality is that the defense budget, just to give you a sense, was $600 billion when President Obama left, and he increased the budget. I mean, it was about $400 billion when President Clinton left. And now Trump has taken it to almost $730 billion. That's $130 billion more a year than where Obama left it. You could have free public college for that money. You could have had triple the NIH budget for that money. We would have had COVID testing if we had invested in the CDC. We could have had coronavirus research. we could have been tackling climate change. So those of us who are pushing for not going along with these extraordinary increases are saying, why don't we take that money and put it for coronavirus research? One more point, which I think is worth mentioning. They want to modernize the ICBMs. This is craziness. These are the land missiles that could trigger a nuclear war. You know, when you have a missile on a submarine or on an Air Force, and if by accident someone says, okay, we want to launch that, you can call that back. You can call back the plane. You can call back the submarine. You can't call back a launched ICBM. And I don't know what would happen if we were on the phone with Russia saying, well, we're sorry, we launched it by accident, an ICBM is coming to your country. So, and you want money to modernize those ICBMs? I mean, so this is the type of thinking that makes me infuriated in the 21st century.
And what is it? I mean, we all know, I mean, we're all thinking people here, and the technology that we have today compared to the 20th century and even the 19th century, I mean, it is totally night and day, and that's putting it mildly. There is no benefit to the thought that there would be a World War III. Perish the thought. I mean, how many more weapons do we need? We have more than the next 7. We spend more money than the next 7 countries combined. And in the very thought that we need more, knowing what is on the other side of that, I mean, we have to seek peace at all costs, but that does not seem to be the narrative that permeates the Congress. Why is that, Congress? Why do you think that people are so afraid, elected folks, even elected folks in relatively safe seats, are so afraid to tell the truth about what is happening with this Pentagon budget and how counterproductive it is for not only peace in the world, but also peace right here at home?
Well, I think that the difficulty is that you have anyone who questions the Pentagon spending automatically, that they're labeled as weak on national security, weak on national defense. And I think what's important for us is to redefine national security, expand national security. I mean, what do people think in Ohio? Do they think that the biggest threat to them is that the Russians are going to march in with tanks, or that the Chinese are going to march in with tanks? Or do they think that the biggest threat to them right now is the spread of coronavirus, and that we need research on vaccines and research on preventative vaccines that weren't funded in 2016? Do they think that the biggest threat is climate change, and that we need to be investing in clean energy and energy storage? Do they think that the biggest challenge in terms of us keeping the lead against China, is it that we need more aircraft carriers and more ICBMs, or is it that we need more universities and more investment in technology so that we're leading in technology? So, you know, I believe that the perspective of shifting resources is in America's national security interest. It's in the national security interest of the ordinary person who lives in a suburb in Ohio. They will be safer. And it's in the interest of our country leading technologically. And that's why I think Democrats, we have to be aggressive on this. We're often flat-footed. We say, we want to cut, and they say we're weak on national security. And we need to say, no, you're weak on national security. You're the ones that are going to lose the 21st century for our nation.
That's right, agreed. And it's the same kind of thing that's bantied for, you know, I'm thinking about my time in the state legislature, and when we wanted to do real criminal justice reform, the first thing that is said about us when you look at it through the lens of Republican and Democrat is that you're soft on crime. No, smart on crime, knowing that the overwhelming majority of people who go to prison come back. And how do we want them to come back? Do we want them to come back better or worse? Do we make sure that we have the full resources to help them rehabilitate or not? And so that is the similar situation I place on what happens in Congress with the military budget. And when Republicans typically, not exclusively, but typically banty that word about it, but it's absolutely not true, because follow the numbers. The numbers don't lie. We have more than the next 7 countries combined, and it absolutely makes no sense at all. Guys, when we think about money in politics, or how the big lobby usually gets its way, when it comes to the military-industrial complex, do you think in your world, being the Congress, that the lobbyists have something to do with why some elected officials won't do the right thing on behalf of their constituents.
Yes, absolutely. I'm seeing it firsthand. I mean, the defense contractors, the lobbyists, they're on the phones, and they're on the phones with the people on the Armed Services Committee where I serve. And those are people who contribute directly to the campaigns of these people on these committees. I mean, it's disgusting. It's really is. And it happened on the case where we were trying to fight against Saudi funding to our funding in support of the Saudi war in Yemen. And you literally had interests aligned with Saudi Arabia supporting funding the campaign coffers of people on these committees. So I don't think it's the whole thing. I think there's also this paranoia and fear of being seen as weak on national security, but it's definitely one of the issues.
And what are some of the steps we can take to kind of allay the fears? Because one of the visions of Drop the Mic 2020 and certainly Ben Cohen is that we are able to educate the American people more about where their money goes. Where does your money go? And I've said this is the 4th week now to folks that reminding them that this is our money. It's not the money. Money doesn't belong to the people who are elected to office. The money belongs to the people. And if we decide that we would like to see some of that money spent on education or healthcare or infrastructure, that should be exactly where that money goes. But part of this is messaging. It's easy to say that somebody's soft on something or putting the country in jeopardy. If you were at a public town hall right now, there's no COVID-19, and somebody said, Congressman, I'm worried about what you're saying, that we should cut and slash the Pentagon budget because it makes us less safe in the world. What would you say to that person to allay their fears?
Well, I would say actually it's going to make you more safe. And the American people, Senator, are already with us. 2-to-1 polling shows that when you ask people the question, do you want us to put more money so we can be on the offense against terrorism and go fight terrorism wherever it is in the world? Or would you rather put that money in our education, in our infrastructure, in our public health? People say, put that money in our infrastructure, our public health. When you say, do you want to have a more militaristic posture towards the world, or do we need to cooperate to solve international problems? People say we need to cooperate to solve international problems. I think they'd be appalled if they knew that 61% of the budget was going into the military. They'd be appalled if they know how much comparatively little we're spending on education, on science, on technology development. They'd be concerned if they knew that China is putting all their money in the science and technology. They're building almost a university a week. They're putting all their money in leading in 5G. Why aren't we leading in the technologies of the 21st century in terms of our spending? So I just think the problem has been that the Democrats often argue from a position of fear. They say we're going to cut defense, and they say, no, we're not. We're just as strong. And if you have a Coke and Diet Coke, usually people take the Coke in terms of the stronger brand. I mean, but what we have to say is no, we have something different. And what we have is different is actually more consistent with your values. I believe it's just about leadership.
Amen to that. And so much of life is about leadership. Well, Congressman, we're going to take some questions. Before that, though, I want to shout out to our friends at Code Pink who are tuned in.
Oh, they're great.
Watching. Yes, they are. Thank you, Code Pink. And I want folks who are here with us to check out Code Pink at codepink.org/divest, baby. That's Code Pink. www, just in case you needed me to say that. I think people get the www part by now, Congressman. codepink.org/divest. Thank you, Code Pink, for being with us tonight. All right, Congressman, our first question comes. It's a tough one. Advocates for reinvesting military spending have pushed for specificity this year, with progressive groups like the People Over the Pentagon Coalition and the Poor People's Campaign calling for up to $200 billion or $350 billion in line item reductions. What number would you put forward, and where would you like to see that funding go if you could redirect it? So in other words, Congressman, the world is yours.
No, I appreciate it. I obviously love Reverend Barber and the Poor People's Campaign, but let me tell you just where the politics are of the Congress. When Barbara Lee and I proposed to keep funding at the levels of 2000 19. That means don't have Trump's latest cuts. We couldn't get the majority of our own budget committee to vote for that. So my view is the easiest case for Democrats, I think, to make that can try to get broad appeal is to say, let's at least take the defense budget back to where it was at the Obama time. And we could take that 130 billion of savings and put it into coronavirus research, put it into national health, put it into school lunches, put it into free public college. And that's is something that Senator Sanders, I know we had worked together on a statement of that last time with the defense budget. And it seems to me something you can rally people around. But I look forward to the panelists' specificity. And one specific area that I think we ought to be cutting is the modernization of ICBMs. I mean, I think that that's a complete dangerous thing for our country to be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Because remind us, you said during President Obama's time, the budget was at
about 600 billion. About 600 billion. It's currently about 720. So, I mean, I just think but we're so, just to understand, we're losing the debate to keep it at 715. I mean, we're not, we lost Democrats overwhelmingly on freezing it at 2019 levels. So there is a huge disjuncture between where the people are, where progressives around the country are, and where American public is, and where Congress is on these issues. And like I said, there's been nothing harder that I've done in Congress than take on some of these interests, both when it came to questioning the funding of Saudi Arabia and the war in Yemen, when it's come to questioning our defense spending. And I've been called, I've had people go on to, some of the cable news and say that I'm sympathizing with terrorists because of this. And so, you have to have thick skin. But of course, Barbara Lee is such a moral conscience on these issues. And she's always been outspoken.
She really has. I mean, that's one thing we know, where the Congresswoman will be on the issues of the Pentagon and the military budget. The whole gospel of fear, so to speak, which leads me to us talking about some of the civil unrest that is going on in our country right now, even when it comes to policing and how we have as a nation militarized our police, how they get the hand-me-downs, if you will. That's what my grandmother would have called it, the hand-me-downs of the military. And somehow the federal government thought it was a good idea to give those hand-me-downs to domestic police. And somehow that would make our cities safer, but that is not the case. Congressman, you have joined forces with a colleague of yours, and you guys have introduced the Peace Act. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, it is so important. It was marked up in hearing yesterday. There were 22 co-sponsors on this before the murder of George Floyd, and these types of things could have been prevented because the current standard of force is being defined by William Rehnquist. Think about that. The ghost of Rehnquist is still governing police conduct across this country, and it says if an officer thinks something is reasonable, they can shoot. And so you have the case, of course, that you've spoken out so eloquently about on Tamir Rice. And there the officers go. They think a toy gun is a gun, and they open fire. And the jury says, or the standard people say, well, the officers thought it's reasonable, so there's no prosecution. Because that's, yes, it's a problem in the jury or judicial system, but it's a problem with the law. Why are we saying that the standard is if an officer thinks it's reasonable? So what we need to do is change it to what every other industrialized country, Western democracy has, which is force has to be a last resort. What does that mean in the case of Tamir Rice? The officers would get there, and unless Tamir Rice was actually ready to fire at them, they would have to leave or de-escalate or issue warnings or do things saying, put your hands up, okay, move away. They couldn't just say, oh, we thought it was reasonable. They would have to show that force was literally last option. And if we make that change, we would go a significant way in reducing police violence.
Agreed, Congressman. And so I think most people know by now, but it's worth repeating that, which is my husband is a retired police officer. Our son is currently in law enforcement. And so
thank you for that. Yeah, service.
And thank you, Congressman. We do come from a service-oriented family. It's a heaviness for me. It always has been, but extra special in this moment, and not extra special in a good way. So I understand this issue from all sides. The story that you're telling about Tamir Rice, I want to remind folks, just in case they do not know, but in 2014, it was November, it was right before Thanksgiving, a 12-year-old Black boy was on a playground playing with a toy gun. A white man called in and said that he thought he had a real gun. I do distinctly remember him saying, I'm not sure, because we got to hear the tapes, and he said to the dispatcher, I'm not sure, but it looks like it's real, not sure. And to the congressman's point, the law enforcement, first of all, they came onto the scene hot. They came in too fast and did not, even if he did have a real gun, but he did not, and he was only 12 years old, but he did not have a real gun. But they didn't even give him a chance. They didn't say, put your hands up, drop the weapon, none of that. He was shot within 2 seconds of those officers locking in on him, which is not the protocol, but that is what happened to Tamir Rice. And it is just really gut-wrenching. When the officer who pulled the trigger was asked, he said he thought he was 20 years old. That's a conversation for another time, that Black children are often seen as older than what they really are, thereby taking away their opportunity to really be children. But Congress, your point is right on. I mean, regardless, yes, lethal force should be the last resort, but even before the Peace Act passes, my God, you have to give somebody a chance to, quote unquote, give up. And that was never done in the Tamir Rice case. There's another case in Ohio you may be familiar with. It was John Crawford. Around that same time, John Crawford, 20-something-year-old man, was in a Walmart outside of Dayton, Ohio. Walmart sells weapons. He had a weapon and he was on his phone, I believe, with his girlfriend. So he's, in the zone, but he picked up the weapon that they sell in the store. It wasn't something that he brought in off the streets. White person calls the police, Black man in the store with a weapon. Sure enough, they get there. There was no, put your hands up, put the weapon down. None of that. They shot John Crawford and killed him. So, just repeat this over and over and over and over and over again. Part of it is the police mentality and how we are socialized in this country. The police really are a microcosm of the United States of America. So when we look at them, we are really looking at ourselves. The other part of this is, what does it mean to be a police officer in law enforcement in the United States of America? Do you truly protect and serve, or do you occupy and patrol Black folks? It's a different standard when it comes to the Black community, Congressman.
Well, you're right, Senator Turner. We've talked about this, that it's different being Black than being a person of color. It's different being Black growing up in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, where I grew up, than being Indian American growing up in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. And when you have a history of 250 years more of slavery, and you add to that 100 years of Jim Crow, that's 350 years of Blacks being thought as less than in the social order, and you have 50 years post-civil rights. You can understand why in a country where you've had 350 years of one view and 50 years just of civil rights, that we still have deep issues in the American psyche about the place for Black people in our society. And we have to recognize that institutional baggage, that institutional history that we carry as our original sin, and then understand that what it means for young Black boys, for young Black girls, for Black mothers, when they see a police car, when they see a police officer, how their response is so different than my family's response or other families' response. For most Americans, the incidents with police are mostly peaceful. People have been pulled over for a ticket. They may ask an officer for directions. They may look at police as a resource. That's a completely different life experience than what the experience is for Black Americans, where they view the police as surveillance, as control, as something to be feared. And I guess the one thing with all of these people on the streets that's given me hope is that it seems at least we're beginning now to have the conversation. At least a light bulb has gone off in some people's heads that the experiences are radically different. And I don't think that even that insight had happened before all of this.
That is true, Congressman. But the sad part about it is that Black people in America always have to have some kind of witness. And now the smartphone is our witness to prove, because those police officers said that Mr. Floyd was resisting, when we know that the camera tells an entirely different story, but they did not hesitate to throw that up. He was resisting. And
right.
we come to find out that it was not true, because police officers, as much as we don't want to admit it, most of them are there to protect and serve. Others of them are not. And when you have bad police officers or people in law enforcement and you don't have good law enforcement personnel to speak up, you put even those good law enforcement officers in jeopardy. We need people to speak up, and we need people from inside law enforcement to speak up and call these things out. And even if the other officers that were standing around had to stop that officer from doing that, George Floyd might be alive today. And it was just the coldness by which that officer kept his full force and weight on Mr. Floyd's neck. And even at the pleas and the cries of the people walking by saying he's bleeding out of his nose, that did not move this man as he had this death stare with his hands in his pocket. So we do have to, there were generations prior to George Floyd crying out, saying they are killing us, this is wrong. But until we have a witness, people tend, and when I say people, the system tends to assume that the Black person has done something wrong or has caused this to happen. And we have to deal with not just police brutality, but deal with the brutality that the African-American community has had to live with our entire existence in the United States of America.
Correct.
This is hard. Congressman, we are going to go to another question. Philip asked, what will be done for permanent party housing for everyday troops? Housing and new schools for dependents is really needed, and Trump has used that money for his wall.
Well, you're first of all, Senator Turner, thank you for sharing so beautifully, as you always do, the real issues and what people are feeling, and seeing the helplessness of George Floyd and the brutality, the cruelty of the way he was treated. The housing is this, obviously so many people right now in COVID-19, they can't afford rent, they can't afford basic housing, and we're diverting money to building walls, to building up defense, where we could be assisting people to be able to afford rent, to be able to afford a place to live. I think that the basic essentials of life, what do you need? You need an education, you need health, you need nutrition, you need a place to live. And when you say, okay, market economy, that's all fine for those of us who had those things growing up, for those of us who had education and a hot meal at school, or a sense of a decent neighborhood to live in. But so many people don't have that opportunity. And then you can't say, well, the market economy is working and they're not working. No, they didn't get the same chance as the rest of us did. So I think housing has to be part of our commitment to people.
Absolutely, all the way around. There are millions of people who are out on the streets every night, don't have housing. It was bad before COVID. It's extraordinarily bad right now, and we do need to make the requisite investments. And the thing is, we have the money. We are not a poor nation. We are a hegemon nation. We definitely have the money. It's a matter of whether or not we have the political will. So I'm really glad that the veil of illusion is coming off on a whole lot of issues in this country, Congressman, that we have.
Well, you're absolutely right, Senator Turner. One point I often make is when you look at the OECD, which is basically the Western democracies, the average tax in the United States on GDP is 24% of our GDP. The average tax in the OECD is 10% higher. We're 33 out of 36 in terms of our percentage of tax. So every time people saying, oh, the taxes are too high, taxes are too high. No, they're not. Actually, we're one of the lowest tax nations when it comes to very wealthy people. And that's why we have made an intentional decision not to say that we want people to become millionaires and billionaires. We made an intentional decision to say, once you become a millionaire or billionaire, we are going to be one of the lowest tax nations, and we're not going to tax you on your 15th yacht and to provide education and housing. Let's just be clear about what choices we made in a society.
Sure, and let off the hook. I mean, there is a belief out there among some elected officials that you just starve government. You remember the battle cry, small government, less government. What does that mean in actuality for everyday people who need government? Government is designed for us to do collectively what we cannot do as individuals. And so when you have this mindset among elected officials, usually Republicans, that say we need smaller government. It would be smaller if they just didn't run, Congressman. That's a whole nother story. Let folks run who really want to be a part of the solution. But just think about how they continue to cut and they cut and they cut. And then from those cuts, they say, well, we can't afford to put money in education. We can't afford to put money into housing. We can't afford to have universal health care, but we can afford to give tax cuts to the wealthiest, the ultra wealthy in this country, because certainly there's nothing wrong with wealth, but we're talking about excessive greed. That's what we're talking about right now, so much so that it chokes the life out of the everyday people of this country. And so the levers of government are being starved to give tax cuts to the ultra wealthy and corporations in this country who, I mean, Amazon, and we heard Senator Sanders say it all the time, is one of his favorite stats. 0 in federal taxes. 0.
And Bezos may become the world's first trillionaire, right? I mean, when you have Apple, which is in my district, and they're becoming an over $1 trillion company, $1.5 trillion market cap, and Amazon, $1 trillion company, Google, $1 trillion company, Microsoft, $1 trillion company, and then you have poverty the way it is, child poverty through the roof. 50% nearly or 40% of Americans low wealth or low wage who are making below double the poverty line. Something is off, right? It'd be one thing if we weren't a rich country. It'd be one thing if we weren't generating wealth, but we're generating wealth. And the reality is that wealth is not being used to give everyone a shot. That was, even those who believe in trickle down economics, they forget the trickle down part. I mean, okay, they do the wealth creation, and then they say, well, it's all economically efficient because you'll take that money, you can tax it, and then you can give everyone else a shot. But they always conveniently forget to do the second part of the equation. So what we're saying, my view, and Democrats, we're saying, let's not start with the wealth creation for the 1%. Let's start with giving everyone housing, education, healthcare, and the human rights, the basic economic rights that you need to lead a dignified life in this country.
That's right. How about that? And we can afford to do that. And that's why I want to remind folks, where does the money go? It's our money. And so Congressman Khanna and I are talking to you a little bit about where the money goes and where that money should go. That Pentagon budget, we can definitely afford to go back to the levels that President Obama had it, even below that, but just even that's a start. And to do away with this $720 billion, 61% of our discretionary budget going to the Pentagon, not going to veterans, not going to the soldiers who are serving right now, but going to contractors and the building of more weapons that will do nothing to promote life at all, 0. So, Congressman, we're going to go to another question. Lucero asks, great question. Where does the money go? Congressman Khanna, tell us about the influence of money against Medicare for all, even during this pandemic. It could be so obvious witnessing how Congress gives trillions to corporations. So there is money to pay for it. Where is the willingness? Hello, somebody on that one.
Well, yeah. Absolutely. Yesterday I was talking to Angus Deaton, and who is a Nobel laureate economist. They've written this brilliant book, Death of Despair. Actually, it's about the white working class and how the loss of jobs in those communities and the stagnation of wages has led to so much despair and higher death rates. And of course, William Julius Wilson made this point 20 years ago about Black communities. We just didn't listen, that the loss of jobs was hurting those communities. But he and his wife made the point that one of the biggest things hurting us is healthcare costs. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, the increase of healthcare costs is one of the reasons that wages have stagnated. The increase of healthcare costs is one of the reasons that companies are not being willing to hire janitors and service workers because they can't afford to pay those healthcare premiums. The increase in healthcare costs is one of the reasons our companies have been offshoring jobs, because they don't can't afford to pay those healthcare premiums and don't want to, and so they offshore the jobs instead. So the healthcare is one of the worst costs in terms of economic growth. He compared it to hiring all these people in the insurance industry, where basically we're digging ditches, filling ditches, but weren't actually doing productive work, and we're just having costs on a society. And the reason I want to highlight his work is, for so long we heard these arguments on Medicare for all. How are you going to pay for it? How is it going to be economically affordable? It turns out actually that Medicare for all would be unleash economic growth. It would allow companies to compete overseas. It would allow companies to hire workers. It would allow companies to raise wages. So who's opposed to it is the people who are making a racket, the insurance industry and the pharmaceutical industry.
That's right. And it's clear that we can afford to give those tax breaks. When it comes to universal health care, we're told not to dream so big. I mean, we certainly heard that time and time again throughout the debates in 2020. And it is sad that even in the face, as Lucero lays out, even in the face of COVID-19, that as a nation, we're still not ready to say universal health care for all people. And people are literally dying. We have 40 million people who have filed for unemployment, I believe, and still growing.
Yeah, 1.5 million just today. I mean, think about that, Senator Turner. I mean, every week, a million and a half people losing their jobs, having no health care often. And you can imagine there's going to be a crisis in this country a year from now when people realize, when they've gone to the hospital on those bills, you don't realize it right away. But those hospitals are relentless. They will come after you. I mean, those creditors, and when they see some of those bills that they thought were covered but turned out not to be covered, that they thought were going to be written off and turned out not to be written off, you're going to have millions of people who unfortunately are going to suffer. And all of this could have been prevented if they were on Medicare.
That's right. And this is an untenable situation, but it doesn't have to be this way. The Congressman, as we wrap up, I want us to talk to people about a different vision, things that can be done and should be done differently. Where does the money go? You should be asking that question on all levels of government, local, regional, state, and federal. And right now with Drop the Mic 2020, the mic stands for the Military Industrial Complex. Congressman Khanna and I are dropping the mic on all kinds of issues tonight. We want to thank Ben Cohen for his vision to help to educate people about that Pentagon budget and why we should care about where our money goes. Congressman, our brother Ben, Minister Ice Cream, has certainly been working on this for many, many decades.
Yes, he has.
So we got to have staying power when we're standing up for what is right and just. Sometimes it doesn't happen overnight, and we got to be relentless in our pursuit for equality and justice for all and standing up for what is right. I want to remind you, sisters and brothers, it is your money. Congress, would you agree? I mean, you serve in the Congress. Would you tell the people it's their money?
Of course it's your money. It's their money, and we're not spending it wisely. I mean, we ought to be spending the money on you, on healthcare, on educating your kids, on making sure you have housing, and making sure that you can pursue the American dream. We ought not to be spending it on foreign wars that are unwinnable when there isn't a threat. We ought not to be spending it on building up a defense force that is unnecessary in terms of the buildup.
Agreed. And it's really not going to get us anywhere. It doesn't make us safer. Actually, it does not. We do need new roads and new bridges. That would make us safer. Putting people back to work would make us safer. Being a compassionate nation, both domestically and bringing world leaders together to find solutions. Those are the kinds of things that make us safer, not building more and more weaponry and spending this money and not taking care of the needs of the people right here at home. Where does your money go? So Congressman, this has been an absolute pleasure. People want to find you on Twitter. It's at Rep. Khanna. Is that correct? Did I get that right?
It is at Khanna, and we tweet back at each other often, Senator. So
yes, we
great.
do. It's such an honor and a pleasure to be in this fight with you. I hate everything is a daggone fight these days, but it's a blessing to be on this justice journey with you. So for all of you tonight, you can be part of the change. Congressman Khanna knows one of my favorite quotes, and we talked about this, is his grandfather. We didn't even talk about this tonight, Congressman, but you come from, your grandfather was one of those freedom fighters. He was in prison with Mahatma Gandhi. Just say a bit about that before we close. If people want to know why you care so much, I mean, you don't have to be doing what you do. You represent Silicon Valley and other portions of the great state of California. You could be one of those who really don't care, but this is in you because it's in your bloodline.
Well, my grandfather, I appreciate you mentioning that, Senator Turner. I mean, Amarnath Vidyalankar, he spent 4 years in jail during Gandhi's independence movement in 1940s and dedicated 15 years of his life, his younger life, to fighting for independence. My grandmother didn't know when he was in jail whether he was going to come home or not for 4 years. She was raising 3 kids, not knowing the fate of her husband. And he believed in dignity. He believed that you shouldn't have British oppression on the Indian subcontinent, and he fought for the dignity of his people, just as Mandela did in South Africa, just like Dr. King and Malcolm X did in our country, and so many civil rights leaders. And that fight, those leaders fought the really, really hard fights. I mean, we still have fights we have to do, but we're not sitting in jail for years. I mean, we are comparatively free. And so I view it as our obligation to continue the work that they began.
And indeed, that we must do. To quote the magnificent Ella Baker, we who believe in freedom cannot rest. So we will not rest. We will continue to press on for the high mark, the high prize, that is justice and equality for all. We are dropping the mic. So on Twitter, drop the mic 2020, baby. And here on Facebook, drop the mic 2020. Please tell your family and your friends. Join us every Thursday. For the next few weeks, we'll continue to bring on spectacular folks like Congressman Khanna, who really do care about the fate of their communities, their state, this nation, and the world. And you, citizen leaders, yes, you can do something to be that change that you want to see in the world. To quote Brother Mahatma Gandhi, good night to everybody. Keep the faith, keep the fight. Congressman, we are so happy to have you in Congress representing all of us. We know that you are technically a representative of the great state of California, but we're going to claim you as the congressman for the nation. How about that?
Well, I'm honored, Senator Turner. I'm so honored to be in these causes with you, and can't wait for your next step, although you're already doing so much with podcasts and being an author and being a leader. But we need your voice in public service at the highest levels. And I'm excited to be on this journey for many years to come with you.
Thank you, Congressman. Back at you. Good night, everybody. And please look out for an elder or a young person. COVID-19 is still going on. So please check on your loved ones. All right, peace.